Thanks for being with us today for this YouTube Live AMA, Driving a Healthy OKR Program with Viva Goals, Leadership Buy-in and Markers of Success. To talk to Mike Berg, Partner Director of Data Science at Ideas, the central data platform, programmability, and data science team for both the Experience Plus devices and security businesses at Microsoft. We're lucky to have Mike with us today. One of the most common questions we get from customers is, we get Viva Goals and OKRs, but how do you do this at Microsoft? So as we go along, please feel free in the comment area to ask your questions, and we'll try to make sure to get to as many as we can, and what we don't get to, answer afterwards. As a data science leader, Mike is responsible for driving key insights across the business through multiple forums. He is responsible for managing the executive OKR program for E&D, which involves a monthly update on the progress of business priorities for a team of over 50,000 individuals. Welcome, Mike.
Thank you, Lucy. Excited to be here.
So, Mike, let's start with the why. Why did your organization, our organization, commit to OKRs and Viva Goals? What were your leaders hoping to accomplish? And how does this reflect the larger values of Microsoft, of the organization?
So sounds great. By the way, we help both with Experience Plus devices and the security team, but for a lot of this today, we'll talk about Experience Plus devices. For the group, this is the engineering team in Microsoft that's responsible for all things from Windows to Office to Teams, Edge, Bing. So just a very large engineering organization. It covers a ton of products. Then on the why, it's good to understand a little bit of where the team was coming from before we adopted OKRs. Prior to OKRs, the team had a very heavy, I would call it a metrics culture. Engineers do love their data, they do love their metrics, they do love to show improvement. And also there was a huge accountability culture, which was great in terms of driving financial items. If you're trying to extend your reach of your particular product, doing things to increase your MAU, the reach of your product, there was a very strong commitment from all the engineering leaders to hit metrics and to hit goals. But one of the things that was behind the scenes or under the covers was, this is just how I feel about it. There wasn't as many people that were willing to take big, bold goals. And, bringing in the OKR program and the OKR methodology, hopefully we pushed people to accomplish more, and the team started taking goals that were worth achieving, so to speak. Beyond that, the appealing thing about OKRs to the program, it's a great way to share the organization priorities. That's something that's very important to our executive vice president, a way to communicate what's important across the entire division. And then I think what's unique about OKRs is the ability to, as we call it, ladder the key results from the leadership team to the organizations of those leaders. We call those the directs to our executive vice president. We call them L2s, it's internal vernacular. But really deeper into the organization, that's some of the cool things that you see on the slide here. So, the OKR program within Experience Plus devices in the prior fiscal year, we had order of magnitude 150 objective and key results. 99% check-in rate, so we're probably doing something right, where we're motivating people to provide great updates. 84% of the OKRs, of the leadership OKRs, are public. They're public to every single one of the 50,000 product engineers, so they can see what's going on in the organization. And then as the OKR program has expanded and gone deeper into the organization, we have over half of the team logging into the Viva Goals tool. There are 900 teams throughout the division who have created their own OKRs. 99% of those OKRs are public. And then a cool thing is within the 32,000 OKRs, 85% of them are in some way, shape, or form laddered up to the leadership team OKRs. And so it could be things that are technical in nature, or it could be things related to team health. So how are we doing driving a great inclusive environment at Microsoft, and many of the other things that are important to the division. So that's what we did in a nutshell. I think we're probably a little bit lucky because, a lot of these cultural aspects of transparency, communicating priorities, like those come very naturally to our executive vice president. But then also, I think we brought it to fruition or made it a reality, and Viva Goals was a big part of that.
Thank you. So as you kind of took this next step and began the program, what did you find? What have you found are the key elements of a healthy OKR program with Viva Goals? And how should you report on progress? How should folks at home think about reporting on progress?
Yeah, I mean, we could probably talk for longer than the hour just about this, but we'll try to simplify it a bit. I think the first thing is leadership buy-in and engagement. At least how things work at Microsoft, if you don't have that leader bought in, then you're really not going to go that far. You need to get them to not just say OKRs are great, but like really embrace the methodology, engage on picking, what I would consider to be good OKRs. There's good OKRs and bad OKRs. Another reason why having a leader involved is, that person's going to really have the best sense of what are the priorities for the division or the team or the group, whatever it is. What are the things that are important this year? And then you really need to balance that with some of the longer term strategic priorities for the division. So the first thing is leadership buy-in and engagement. The second thing is, we had this before, but clear owners and accountability. So do you have people who are really going to feel like they own, whether it's the objective or the key result? Do they really feel like they're going to own it and drive it? I think that kind of came pretty easy, but just it's so fundamental to success that we have to mention it. The third thing is anytime you're trying something new, I think you need to have a culture of learning and growth. For us, adopting OKRs the first time, we had we'll talk about this later, I think, but we had some challenge getting folks to really embrace the aspirational nature of goals and goals versus metrics. So you might have people that are, very fixated on, hey, I want to drive, I have a new product, I want to drive 1 million users. Well, there's a bunch of things that you can do to drive users in a really cheap, easy, or not, kind of a way that doesn't accrue to long-term benefit. But I think a culture of learning and growth when you're trying anything new is super important. And then the last thing is publishing the OKR results in what I would call an appropriate public forum. We said earlier that 84% of our OKRs are public and transparent to the entire division. There's also going to be some things that we consider to be, company secrets that are so important. And, balancing, the need for transparency versus the need for security. But also it's important to make sure that whether it's metrics or OKRs, that, effectively that they're celebrated in a public forum. And so what we do is we run a monthly leadership team meeting. I know a bunch of teams at Microsoft will have OKR meetings that are either weekly or biweekly. And then at least at the division level, you need to have a broad reach element. And so we include an update on the division OKRs at every single town hall that our executive vice president will host.
Thank you. That's really helpful understanding the nuts and bolts there. For number 2, for that OKR ownership and accountability, is being able to assign owners and delegates in the Viva Goals product kind of helpful with that, especially as we move the process out of more manual PowerPoints and spreadsheets and into Viva Goals?
Oh, I chuckle, Lucy. It's 100% necessary. Like we would, it's so necessary and fundamental. At least what happens for us is, our executive vice president, he will assign ownership of an OKR to one of his LT members. That LT member then will probably have a team that's working on that, right? And so, that leader will also need the ability to assign and delegate it out, and really to track progress at a deeper level. And then, one of the things that happens because our OKRs are laddered with the other team OKRs, another cool thing that the tool enables us to do is to have a single source of truth, so to speak, where the people who are running that project from a day-to-day basis, they can update their OKR in one place. It shows directly to their team, to their own manager, to their own vice president, and all the way up to at the division level. So I sort of chuckled that seems so fundamental to me, but I'm super grateful that that's part of the Viva Goals tool.
Yeah, and we get a lot of positive feedback, specifically in organizations where both inside and outside Microsoft and Viva Goals around, in many organizations, a leader might own an OKR, but the person actually responsible for going to check in is going to be their chief of staff, their EA. So that kind of delegate format can also be really helpful, especially when you're working with very high levels of leadership.
Yeah, and we don't. We're an engineering team, and while we will, our leaders will have EAs and chiefs of staff to some degree. We find that making sure it's one of the product managers or engineers who's ultimately responsible for the check-in is super important. It's just they're the ones who are really driving the work and accountable for the proper message, the proper status, understanding the trade-offs that they're making at a team level. And so, again, just so important, so fundamental. And then, the thing that you don't know is that, oftentimes in a big division like the Experience Plus Devices team, we're 50,000 people strong. There might be one part of, say, the Teams team that's working on something, and they need help from the Windows team or, the Office team, whoever it is, the OneDrive team, whoever it is. And knowing who those accountable parties are at the product level can shorten development cycles and just make it easier to find your peers.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah, that's very, very helpful. So what advice, moving on to our next question, do you have for teams tasked with influencing leadership and adopting OKR programs that have the potential to impact company-wide decisions like so many of the leaders that you work with do?
Yeah, so sounds great. I think that this is a great question. At the end of the day, at least how I interpret the question, it's effectively how do you pick the right OKRs? And here are some thoughts on that. I mentioned this earlier, but leadership buy-in and engagement is it's critical. I hit on this as well earlier. You have to balance both short-term business goals and longer-term priorities. There's going to be some things that you just have to make progress on this year. But if you're only focused on the short-term priorities, then you're not going to be making enough progress on your longer-term bets. Another thing that we debate a lot internally is what's the right number of OKRs for your team or your world. I've seen a $100 billion business pick 20 OKRs. I've seen them pick 150 OKRs. I've seen a business that's 1/10 of the size of $10 billion business. Have about 600 OKRs. So I've sort of seen different things. I've seen different approaches. And the team that has more OKRs, they really kind of break it out at the product level and really try to drill down and make it just fundamental to how they run their entire team. Ultimately the right number of OKRs though is about it comes down to how you're going to use them. We all love OKRs, and then there's overhead. It doesn't matter if it's OKRs, metrics, compensable metrics, anything therein. But anything you track costs time. It costs you time, money. The opportunity cost of doing other things. And because of that, my advice is always going to bias to the fewest number that makes sense to you. So again, going back to that, big business, but smaller part of the business that is tracking so many OKRs, 600 OKRs is probably the right thing because it's so fundamental and so ingrained to how they run the business that's the right decision. So first thing, leadership engagement and buy-in. Second thing, getting the right number. The third thing is, having clear goals. No pun intended here for the Viva Goals audience. But there should just be no ambiguity in terms of, whether you've made progress. That's not something that's necessarily, only a thing that an OKR program should do. But just there should be no ambiguity if you made progress or if you made enough progress for the period, for the quarter, for the semester, for the year. And then, again, we hit on this in the last topic, but, having accountable owners is just so important. And, alignment to product strategy. So if we're picking OKRs that, they're they're not aligned to what the actual teams are driving under the covers, then it's just you're going to end up with friction in the system, and you're going to end up with people not really wanting to participate. So again, these are some simple rules that we've used to pick great OKRs, and then I think it's helped the program. I think it's helped the EVP. I think it's helped the division.
Yeah. Two follow-up questions here. How do you balance, or is this something that you think about, OKRs and goals that are, more stretch goals, more kind of moonshots, and then OKRs that, we must achieve or there will be consequences. How do you balance that or think about that?
Oh, I think that's probably one of the biggest hurdles we had to overcome when, adopting OKRs. Again, we came from a culture that was so accountable, and just using a very simple or fake analogy, let's say your product is at 10 million users, right? And you then need to go report to the big boss, whether it's a he or she, you want to go look good to that person. And so, if you set a target of going from 10 million to 12 million and you end up at 12.5 million, like, congratulations, you look good to your boss. But maybe you could have gone farther. And so, there is a bunch of things in there from a cultural angle. But in the tool, we actually allow the teams to set what type of OKR are they adopting. Is it an aspirational target, or is it a commitment-based target? And then our general rule of thumb is, if it's a commitment-based target, we only allow commitment-based targets for things that are tied to the financial engine of the company. And then another thing we try to do is, if it's truly a financial KPI, like, without giving away a company secret, I'll just sort of use a sales analogy. If we have a new product and we want to hit a sales number for it, then we'll actually put it on a different sheet of paper, something that we call the key performance indicators, or KPIs. And then what that does is it really creates space, or allows, or sets the stage that for your OKRs, you should be taking aspirational goals. And then there's this cultural element where you'll probably have to train, educate, reinforce with your audience, with your leader, with everyone who's involved. This is a new world. This is a new way to do it. It's okay if you show up and the tool is yellow. And so it was a little tough because we were adopting Viva Goals, but so we didn't have a lot of discretionary money floating around the office. But we actually had threatened or offered to get the entire leadership team yellow T-shirts that say "Embrace your inner yellow," as sort of a joke to kind of make the point that it's okay to be yellow. And again, that's just because our team came from a place where they're so commitment driven. If you set a target, if you make a promise to quote unquote the big boss, like, gosh, you want to hit it. And getting over that notion where, again, using that 10 million to 12 million analogy, is if you set the goal higher, 15 million, and you land at 14 million, that's better for the business than if you landed at 12.5 million, all things being equal. So
That's great. And thank you for that analogy. I think that's helpful. We get a lot of questions specifically around from sales leaders, customers that we're talking to around, but how do I, we do have revenue targets. How do I make this, work in that scenario in terms of the more ambitious goal setting? And I think you've given a really nice framework and foundation for that, for having that conversation. The last follow-up I want to have on what you've shared here before we move to the next question is, how do you, or did you run into any scenarios, in your role where you were kind of promoting, hey, like, let's slim down the number of OKRs that, the different leaders are committing to? Was that a conversation? Was that a, just a guideline? How did you handle that?
That's a great question, Lucy, because again, one of the key things here is, pick the right number of OKRs for you, right? And when you get this cool new tool like Viva Goals, one of the great things about Viva Goals is then you can break the key results into what, I don't know if we're using the proper product term, but we call them sub-KRs. So as an example, one of the things that our division runs is we have effectively a free version of Office. It's a web-based version of Word, Excel, and PowerPoint. And a lot of people don't know about it. And so we were trying to drive up, that was one of the OKRs. And then getting the 3 different product teams to work together, we leveraged the sub-KRs, and it was great because then it increased our ability to have accountable owners who felt like they owned a unique thing, right? And we thought that was great. And then I think we just sort of realized, oh my goodness, there is this overhead and this cost of, then you expand out, 7 objectives, order of magnitude 50 key results that go with those 7 objectives, into order of magnitude 150 things that need to be updated and tracked. And look, again, there's no right answer. The only right answer is the right answer that is for the group that you're working with. But as a general rule, I have a bias to a fewer number. But again, I also work with a team that they have 600 OKRs across their division. They review them in a 2-hour meeting every week. And again, it's so fundamental to how they run their business and how the leader wants to run the business. So I think, did I answer the right question, by the way, Lucy?
Yeah, that was a great answer. Yes.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. So moving to our next question here, how do you connect strategic planning, so the most important goals of the organization, which have the most leadership attention? Can think of a few things that we've been talking about as an organization lately, into the OKRs you create and track in Viva Goals?
Again, another great question. I do have to be a little bit careful about how I answer this particular question. One thing maybe just to know generically for the audience here is that our division does have a dedicated strategy team. They are the team that's basically looking out for those longer term strategic growth bets. Basically, the thing that this audience should know is they have a 3-year a 3-year plan that they're always looking for. It's tied to a bunch of the financial work that our finance team does. But just sort of know that we have a series of these longer term growth bets that are anywhere from 3 to 5 years out of making progress. And then there's some more that you just sort of need to know about how and why we pick our OKRs at the division level. And by the way, I know it's the industry best practice to close the OKR period, do a reflection, learn and grow, and then pick new OKRs. And just we do things a little bit different here, and it's the nature of our leader. It's the nature of the style. For the benefit of the audience, though, our fiscal year starts on July 1st. It ends on June 30th, and then our leader likes us to hit the ground running on July 1st. And so effectively, we set the marker, we set the bar where we want to have all of the OKRs picked for the subsequent fiscal year 30 days ahead of time. And then the last point is then, kind of how does the OKR selection process work? Our division leader will first start with the OKR skeleton. That person will have strong opinions on the O's or the objectives. The leader will create a skeleton of the KRs. It's a version 1. And basically at that point in time, they're just empty key results. Think about them as vessels, and the EVP will then assign those KRs to his direct reports. And there'll be a very good process to do 2 or 3 waves of feedback. Invariably, every single one of those leaders will give feedback to the EVP. Number 1, you have too many OKRs. And then they will also, in the same voice, say, but you forgot this one thing that's really important to my team, so you have to add it. And I think that's going to be a challenge across a bunch of the audience as well. But effectively, what the leader will do then is assign those OKRs to the LT owners. And that's sort of then when our process kicks off, and we will orchestrate the process behind the scenes. We'll work with those OKR owners. Within a kind of 2 to 4 week range, we will present them back the final definitions to the division leader. There'll be some great debate about whether those are the right things to track, the wrong things to track. If it was the spirit of what the executive vice president had in mind when he, put that empty vessel out to his leadership team. And then much later, we worry about targets and goals and stuff like that. And so if you sort of zoom out, then, you lock on the priorities. As I stated earlier, you do need to balance what are your longer term strategic goals, and then what are the things you need to get done this quarter, this semester, or this fiscal year. So lock on the priorities, number 1, lock on the what, number 2, and then later on you lock on how much. Again, thinking about some of those longer term strategic goals, it's going to depend on what your goal is. What we have a number of products within our division, they're trying to find product market fit. And so, if we would give them, something like a financial target, a user-based target, if you give a product like that a hard target too early, then you could actually crush the product, and you could crush the product making process. And so for those things that are more strategic in nature, I would recommend that instead of giving them a hard number target, is just allow those teams to give a self-assessment on how they're finding product market fit.
Thank you. That's great. That's great. I love the specificity there that you gave us. And I think it's interesting, you started off by saying, I know it's not best practice to kind of jump right into the next planning season without, being able to reflect, because we know we need to hit the ground running. But I do think a lot of organizations, find themselves in that place, especially when you have these long-term strategies that you need to execute towards. What hurdles did you clear bringing both Viva Goals and a KR structure to company leaders last year? And what surprised or delighted you about that transition and process?
Well, thanks, Lucy. I love the 3-part question here. On hurdles, just getting people familiar with the tool was a hurdle. It was actually easy to get over, sort of once you played around with it. There was this moment where, her name shall remain nameless, but somebody who was very worried about us doing the very first presentation to our EVP in the Viva Goals tool. And just, again, I said earlier that our culture as a whole, like we're, perfectionists, like we have a high bar, a high degree of accountability. And just, we had to make a moment, we had to make a leap. We're like, hey, the tool, like, we're going to use it. We're going to pull it up. We're going to pull it up in front of our EVP, and we're just going to go do it. And, related to that is, this whole the process around OKRs, I guess it's kind of the same as if you run a metrics or a KPI program, but effectively you have to get, the broad set of folks to to provide you the check-ins and provide you check-ins in enough time. Because again, remember we said our EVP will assign an OKR to an LT member. That LT member will then delegate it down, right? There is some art in the science of getting the right level of an update to your executive vice president. Then again, you sort of then zoom out, and we showed some stats earlier where, we have a 99% check-in rate, and that's probably better than a bunch of the other teams out there. And so, just getting people comfortable with the tool and getting people comfortable with the process and getting people comfortable with the fact that OKRs are different than metrics or KPIs, like those were sort of the hurdles that we had to overcome in the first 90 days of the program. The surprises, again, going back to that anecdote earlier, where like, hey, we're just going to totally change the way we're running the meeting. We're going to pull up Viva Goals and we're going to run it from there. And it was a smashing success. And I think, by the way, there is a lesson there where, as the old adage or old saying goes, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. And kind of, I'm a visual person. I like to see data in a certain way. And then, by the way, your leader or whoever you're working with might actually want to see data a totally different way, right? And so just the raw directness and transparency, I think, spoke very well to our leader. And then because of that, some of the other surprises is, at least for us, the executives, go at a little bit of a fast pace here at Microsoft. And sometimes they want to see the results before the middle managers are able to produce the results. Our OKRs, we'll use the term melting pot here, but we bring together a bunch of different teams at Microsoft. We're all part of the Experience Plus Devices team. But we're trying to, standardize on the way that we report insights to leaders. We try to do that so that, it's easier to receive. So we aligned on this notion of, if you're doing a good Viva Goals update, you're going to have 3 key elements. And, then also we sort of come from the school of thought of, be brief, be bright, be gone. And so what we do is we coach people to, a good Viva Goals check-in will have 3 things. It'll have 1 to 2 sentences on performance, 1 to 2 sentences on 1 or 2 insights, and then 1 or 2 sentences on your actions. And it's probably a pretty good rule of thumb. And then, by the way, if you're driving a product with hundreds of millions of users, like a single OKR is not going to probably suffice to update your leader on everything that you're doing. But again, just the process angle was a bit of a surprise, where again, I think the executives want to see the results faster. And then, as you think about the OKRs as they ladder from leader to vice president to product owner to delegate, right? Each one of those people in the chain will want to see the check-in as it goes up the proverbial food chain. And so I think that requires us to be persistent but nimble. And then, you asked a third part of what delighted you. We're flashing this slide again about some of the stats and some of the things we've been able to measure with the help of Viva Goals. The delight to me is not the stuff at the top. The delight to me is the stuff at the bottom, where we've effectively then created space where 900 teams within a 50,000 person division are trying Viva Goals, and they're trying OKRs, and they're aligned up. And there's this notion of cultural change and driving impact deeper in the organization. And that's one of the great things about the tool and what allows you to do.
That's really helpful. And that engagement, I think, is what, like getting teams engaged in the process, I think, is where there's a big focus for folks who are rolling out Viva Goals. So I think seeing these results is very impressive. I want to go back to something you mentioned a bit earlier around, KPIs versus OKRs. And sort of, understanding that we need KPIs to understand just that we're meeting our most fundamental, business commitments, but then bringing OKRs on, for almost like a different layer. And I was just wondering if you could sort of sum up that, OKRs versus KPIs, like what's the difference? And as you were sort of evangelizing that difference, kind of how you would speak to that, because that's also a question we do get from quite a few customers and organizations who are interested in Viva Goals.
Yeah, so to me, a KPI, it's a metric that is aligned to your long-term financial goals, right? I'm going to use a generic example, or I'll try to use an example from here at Microsoft that we won't divulge the company secret, but how many how many active devices are there for Windows? That's going to be something that's going to be so fundamental to the long-term success of our company. What's the revenue? How is revenue going for some of our growth bets? What is how are we doing on the browser of Edge, our Microsoft first-party browser versus Google? Like those are some of the KPIs that we track that again are so fundamental to the long-term success of our business or businesses, as it were. And you think about an OKR then as the priority for the year, right? So using the Windows example, I think people will probably know this. We launched Windows 11 a couple of years ago, almost to the day, I guess. And so the OKR for this year, at least as it relates to Windows, is more about how we're driving depth engagement within the consumer audience and how we're driving Windows 11 adoption within the enterprise part of our business. And so you sort of need both, but we found that separating them out and separating out the things we have to report up to our CFO, Amy Hood, versus the things that are our own priorities, we found that separating those things out, still looking, when we do an OKR review with our leader, we still look at the financial KPIs, but just putting them on a different sheet of paper or a different part of Viva Goals if you choose to, because there is a way to do that. But if you just put them in a different place, it sort of separates out the conversation, and it makes it easier then to take those big, bold goals on your OKRs.
That's great. That's great. And I love that sort of actionable advice for folks watching this at home. When designing an OKR program for executives, what essential qualities do you need to show in both objectives and key results to ensure leadership, buys in and thinks you're focusing on the right things?
Yeah, so first of all, another good question. So thank you, Lucy. Again, this is the stuff that works for me and for our situation, and for the other OKR practitioners out there, like maybe there's things that you would do that would meet your own situation. I just hit on this a moment ago, but separating the financial KPIs from your OKRs was a critical thing for us to do. Again, it really got the engineering leaders and financial leaders to create space to review the financial part of the business, and then to spend more time, at least for an engineering team, then focusing in on product quality and what we're doing to drive our products. Then there's probably kind of three parts to this: of before the meeting, during the meeting, and after the meeting, because like that's sort of the space that, at least for us in our culture, like we will dedicate 2 hours and we'll go through all the OKRs and kind of have some healthy debate and dialogue about how things are going, talk about where people need help. But before the meeting, understand who are the owners, and make sure there's a tops down and a bottoms up set of communications. So as an example, early on in our OKR journey, we sort of went to all the delegates and said, hey, you need to write a great OKR update and check it into Viva Goals. And then you fast forward to the meeting or the review with the executive vice president, and magic, everything's on track, everything's green. And there was this moment where like even the executive vice presidents, direct reports were like, who provided these check-ins? Even though you can clearly see that in Viva Goals, who provided these check-ins? I was not consulted on this. And so you really need to make sure there's space then for the owners to have their own part of the process. And so we have a bit of a kind of a work back or a TikTok, so to speak. But just understand who the owners are. Make sure there's tops up and bottoms down communication. Sorry, bottoms up communication. One of the things we do about a week before the meeting as well is we host something called a results and insights review. We do this for a couple reasons. It actually creates a forcing function for people to get their Viva Goals check-in or any other inputs from the finance team. And then, our role in that OKR review is to effectively be the master of ceremonies. And it allows us to figure out, hey, within this broad array of OKRs, do you want to talk about all 150? Or do you want to spotlight 5 to 10 where like, hey, I think that's going to be an interesting discussion. We can really help the leadership team take an action or make an action plan for a particular area. Then again, sort of the last thing before the meeting is making sure that you're sending out the results ahead of time. So T-3 days, we send a note to the LT owners. And then the day before the meeting, we send out a pre-read to make sure everybody has current status. During the meeting part of it, it's basic storytelling, I think. Start with the big picture. Make sure you give space for that leader or reviewer to see the entire picture, to see the entire forest. I found a best practice is to come into the meeting and recommend like, hey, here are the 3 to 5 focus areas. Also give space for that leader to probe on anything that they want, anything he or she feels requires inspection and or a little bit more help. After the meeting, good notes, focus on actions and decisions. And then, again, if you have 150 OKRs, you're probably paying in order of magnitude 300 to 350 people to contribute. You have to have a feedback loop to those people. Depending on the culture of the group, again, within, I've seen one team invite 140 people to an OKR review. I've seen another team invite 20. So if you're kind of in that ladder and only 20 people are in the kind of the smoke-filled chamber, so to speak, then making sure there's a feedback loop so people can understand, what was the dialogue in the room, what happened, what were the actions. We really focus on actions that were taken and decisions that were made as we think about it. But effectively, people will sort of ask like, I gave you this thing, what was the outcome on my thing? And, just I think if you go then, in our case, Bug, cajole, herd 300 people in the division to give you stuff, like you really have to build that partnership, and it's actually a fair trade-off, right? They should know what the reception was, they're the one who's living and breathing that priority every day. So you have to give them that information back, and there needs to be a feedback loop. So that's how we think about it. And so here's the broader schedule up on the slide. But again, you kind of have some communications that go out 2 weeks ahead of time. There's a bunch of activity leading up to the meeting, kind of T-7, T-4. And then again, just having a feedback loop is so critical. And it's a way that you as an OKR practitioner, OKR program leader, you can help the division scale, as opposed to just like think beyond the meeting, think beyond trying to make your executive happy, think beyond trying to push OKRs out into the world such you can have the biggest impact for your team.
I love too what you said around having that results and insights meeting that essentially is the forcing function for the team as they prep for the important leadership meeting, so that they can get the data they need essentially to make the updates in the way that you've recommended. I think that's really critical. And I think some teams do this async and some teams do this in person, but I think the in-person then can allow for some of those conversations to come up in that room. Do you feel that that using Viva Goals and kind of creating this, road to the executive room ROB has helped have better conversations prior to that leadership meeting so that then those conversations are more fruitful at the time?
Yes, 100%. And then, kind of this is the stuff that we do, right? And so, again, I sort of use that example of, driving Office online or Office on the web. I'm quite certain that the day before the OKR review, that leadership team member is reviewing the results with, his or her team as well, right? And so this is kind of the stuff we do through the central program. And then, just I think that's actually where the action really happens, right? And I think the other benefit of bringing folks together in kind of those results and insights reviews is you can then, the benefits we get is then you like Windows team over here, like maybe they, it's a part of the team that's never talked to the Teams team. By the way, the Windows team and Teams team work on a ton of stuff together, but like, whoever might be your delegate for the OKR program, like they might see how the kind of the other part of the division is working on this stuff. And, it will bring best practices from team 1, team 2, so really kind of bring the teams together.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead. Were you about to say something else?
No, that's it. Sorry.
Okay, no, great. We have a question from the audience I wanted to make sure we got to. Do you have any tips to sustain an OKR program after the initial excitement subsides?
Yeah, I have two. So first of all, that's a real thing, right? And for this, I'll actually pick on myself. So about a year ago, I was leading a team of about 40 people, and as a way to familiarize myself with Viva Goals, I'm like, I'm going to go set up all my OKRs in Viva Goals, and it was a great way to communicate out. And then you're like, oh my goodness, now I'm asking the team to update 20 things every month. Like that could be a lot of overhead. And so, I think then the tips to sustain is, some of the tips we talked about earlier, you have to pick the right number of OKRs. So that's a thing. I think making sure that you have the right degree of public forums. So for us, we have a leadership team review, but then also we make sure that there's our leader will have a broad scale reach meeting called a town hall. And making sure that the OKRs are, probably at a different altitude, are discussed in that town hall.
Mhm.
And then the third thing is, at least as relates to at least the executive part of it, is this is what I was saying earlier on the storytelling aspect. Like if you have 150 OKRs and you come into the OKR meeting and you say, hey, I want to talk about these 5 things. It's the same 5 things all the time. Then you're probably wasting your own time. You're wasting your team's time, to be really direct about it. And so I think you do want to almost think about yourself as a copy editor, where you're thinking like 2 or 3 months down the road of like, oh my goodness, product X is launching in 2 months, right? Let's make sure we hit on the OKRs, the product launch OKRs until that point, and then we also do a retrospective on it. So I guess I'm saying 3 things is pick the right OKRs, pick the right number of OKRs. Number 2, make sure it's not just an executive meeting, but there's an executive and scale part of the communication plan.
Mm-hmm.
And then the third thing is make sure that for lack of a better term, everyone gets their day in the sun, or every OKR gets their day in the sun. Because if there's something that never gets talked about in one of those meetings, or whether it's the town hall in a really broad forum, or in one of those executive meetings, if it's not being talked about, like our experiences is not that important. And so just getting the right number of, hitting on it again, but getting the right number of OKRs for how your team or division uses them is fundamental to your long-term success as well. And by the way, you'll probably get it wrong the first time. We got it wrong the first time, and like you have, going back to the culture of learning and growth, is you have to just sort of accept it and then, be bold enough to recommend a change.
Yeah, I was just at Envision NYC, Microsoft's conference about AI yesterday, and Adam Grant was on stage and said, it's not really about, best practices, it's about better practices, and also mentioned, that Danny Kahneman, who wrote, who was a great researcher in just the field of bias and being wrong, told him, I love being wrong because it means I'm less wrong today than I was yesterday. So I think that growth mindset is incredibly critical as you are rolling out such a large and strategic program in an organization, and tracking such important progress. So Mike, I want to thank you for giving us this time and this insight into not just, the strategy behind how you've thought about this, but also some really tactical tips for our audience. I also want to give some next steps to our audience here today, whether you're watching live or on demand. So you can register for our next event in the Viva Goals community, Viva Goals Office Hours, how to build a high-performing team with Viva Goals. And if you're not a Viva Goals customer yet and you came to learn more, you can sign up for a free 60-day trial today. So you can scan either of the QR codes you see on this screen. And then connect with us on LinkedIn. So you can scan here to reach Mike's profile or my profile and follow along on our journey. Mike, thank you again. I really appreciate the time. And we'll see everybody next time.
Thank you, Lucy. I hope we helped some folks out. And, again, there's probably some common things and some things that are going to be unique to our own situation. But I appreciated the conversation with you as well. So have a great day.
Have a great day.